Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking a little bit about planetary objects, creating planets or whatever within Octane. We'll talk a little bit about the pen tool. This is not really a tutorial. This is not really a complex thing that I feel needs a tutorial. If this is something you're struggling with, hopefully this video will point you in the right direction, but I'm not really keen on sharing, like, oh, my exact settings and stuff like that. Like, most of this stuff, I don't even, remember exact settings. I don't really save them. I know basically what I need to do, and I kind of art stuff together. It's one thing if you're doing a production and you want to have everything have, like, the same basic look. Alright, then you'll start with, a single asset, get it into the ballpark, and then you create all your other assets based on that source asset, and you'll just, by your very nature, you'll have a consistent look to everything. The other thing I want to talk about is the pen tool that came out in Octane 4, which is what we're currently using. I'm not using the pen tool for this. The pen tool is good for what it does, and there's certain situations where it is ideal, and there's other situations where it's not. Principally speaking, why I'm probably not going to use the pen tool for a ton of stuff is that it frankly it doesn't allow you to move the planets and have multiple planets in the scene. A good example of what that might look like here, we'll just grab our base layer. This planet, by the way, is 3 concentric spheres: a ground layer, a cloud layer, and an atmosphere layer. So we'll go ahead and clone the whole bunch. So we have our duplicate here. And you can see their light is interacting with each other. Oh, so good. You cannot do that with the pen tool. Let's go ahead and replace this with one of my other planets. And then hit reload, because it doesn't automatically update within Octane unless you hit the reload button. Boom. And so if you've seen my my other planets that I recently posted images of, this was the first one. So just kind of scale it down. Have the shadow there. Set up our camera. Boom. So now we have this cool, fairly photorealistic looking planetary scene, done very quickly. Something that cannot be done with the pen tool because we have 2 planets in the scene. They are interacting directly and overlapping each, the other. Sure, DOF is off. One will cast shadows on the other, and you get some bounce light off of here onto here. I'm not sure how well that's going to come across on YouTube, but you get these really cool, interactions that you just can't get with the pen tool. Now, the pen tool is great at creating an HDR environment for your scene, for lighting, but there's no reason why this stuff can't also be turned into an environment texture, an HDR environment texture, by setting up everything you want for the super large scale stuff, and then turning that into a spherical texture, saved out as an EXR or an HDRI, and then using your texture environment node. The last thing I suspect that people want to know about is the atmosphere. But before I get to that, I just want to acknowledge that the ground textures for these planets were paintings, actual paintings, created in real life by my friend Ali. I believe her last name is pronounced Ries, or perhaps Raz, or something along those lines. I'm not great at names, proper nouns, and I don't think I've actually talked to Ali ever in person to actually hear her pronounce her name. So, apologize, Ali, if I'm mispronouncing your name. I believe it's Ries, but I am probably mistaken. But she created these awesome pour paintings that are available on her DeviantArt page, and I'll post a link to that in the video description. But I've actually gone ahead and taken those pictures and created material sets out of them in Bitmap to Material. If you don't know what Bitmap to Material is, highly recommend it. Can't recommend it enough for these types of things, where you are able to take a single texture, it could be a JPEG off a Google search or whatever, and then are able to not only force it to be a tiling image, but you are also able to extract normal maps, specular maps, roughness maps, and all that kind of stuff out of the image to create a PBR material. And that's how I'm getting these ground textures. Now, the atmosphere, this is actually a pretty simple thing, and I suspect most people probably do it this way. But go ahead and grab one of these atmospheres. Open up the surface editor. Oops, I thought I had it open already. I didn't. All right. And aside from the stuff that is not hooked up to anything, what we have is a mixed node, a fall off texture, which is plugged into the amount of the mixed node, and then we get our RGB spectrum textures, which are basically just color solids that I'm using to color the atmosphere, and the fall off texture is going in and creating the opacity for the atmosphere. And here's the settings for it. Now, I don't really like giving out specific settings for things, mostly because I don't want people to feel like they have to use these exact settings. You don't have to use the exact settings. I encourage you to find settings that work for you and for your particular style and what you're after. If you're after my exact style here, well, here you go. But it's not anything that's particularly special or amazing or anything like that. These are basically me just playing around with it until I got something that I liked. I do encourage you guys to figure stuff out on your own as best as you can, but like I said, this should be more of a kind of a kickstart to getting in the ballpark of where you want to be. And the last final step is the soft edge here. Theoretically, you could, using a multiply node and a separate fall off texture, you could probably create the soft edge within the material itself. But because it's kind of like tweaky and kind of like hard to figure out, hard to really get a hold of visually, because there's no really great easy way to visualize it other than the render itself. Unlike Lightwave's gradient tools, which are actually pretty good. I hate Lightwave's node editor itself, but its gradient tools are actually been historically really good. And so to do that last bit, I am literally, you can see I have two keyframes here. If I open up the graph editor, select the scale, you can see that I just have literally two keyframes, one on 0, one on frame 1. The pre-behavior and post-behavior set to repeat. So before the first keyframe and after the last keyframe, the animation is played over and over again. And by having motion blur turned on, you get that soft edge. It's kind of cheeky, but it works. It's been working for ages. It's very similar to the old spinning light trick back before we had soft edge shadows, pre-shadow map shadows, all that kind of stuff. Like I said, it's an old trick that people like me have been doing for ages and ages and ages. and the results are actually pretty decent. So it's obviously not a volumetric scattering material that actually absorbs wavelengths of light and shades correctly. It's not going to go from like blue to red or anything like that. Like it really should. And if you use the pen tool, you actually do get that that more photorealistic result. And that's one of the key advantages of why you'd want to use the pen tool. But I couldn't create this image with the pen tool without a lot of shenanery. And so and you saw how quickly this came together. The actual planets themselves, like the first one probably took me like anywhere between 20 minutes and an hour to kind of dial in. This one having slightly more complex ground material than this one, only because it has the emissives. But you can see here that the emissives show up on the daylight side, and there's really no way to fix that without compositing. So theoretically, I could take the render without the clouds or atmosphere or whatever, and do like a mask with the shadows to capture the shadows on the emissive channel, mix that out, and then add like the clouds and atmosphere back on over through compositing. But I think for in this particular case, the fact that you can see the emissives during the day side is fine. If you're doing city lights, well, they're just you're not going to have something as bright, or want to have something as bright, so they don't show up as much. And so it's not like during the day people turn off their lights, like is what like the pen tool and the Video Copilot plant tool for After Effects, those things will do for you. If I was actually just doing straight up Lightwave, I could do it easily because there's a light instance gradient that you could use as a mask. But Octane, as far as I'm aware, doesn't have that type of feature, and so that would have to be coded as a like an OSL shader or something like that in order to get that to work. But as long as you're keeping things fairly reasonable, you probably don't need that unless you really do. But you could probably come up with a creative solution to that. Perhaps like by building a hard mask that you then, or not a hard mask, but a mask that you work into the angle of your planet and you draw that on the position that on the shadow line or something like that. You could do it that way, but that's less instantly flexible. So you'd have to, you could change your lighting, but then you'd have to change that texture to match the lighting every time, which is kind of annoying. But if you're working on feature film, no big deal. But if you're working on feature film, you could have someone write a shader. So that's pretty much it. Again, I want to thank Ali for creating these pretty cool base paintings that are used as the texture for the planet. And I want to thank everyone who seemed really interested in how I put together these planets. I hope you guys are informed by this video. It's not really meant to be a tutorial, more of a kind of a broad explanation. I really think people, need to have confidence in themselves in order to come up with, the solutions for handling this type of stuff. This is stuff I've been doing for decades, so converting the process to Octane is no big deal. But again, I have the advantage of having been doing this for almost 20 years professionally. So again, thank you guys very much. I appreciate all the support you guys have been sending me lately, and I'll see you next time.